I felt sorry for Sir Lindsay Hoyle at the time, and I still retain quite a bit of that. Now, when it first happened, I saw this clearly as Labour leadership putting pressure on a Labour MP, Sir Lindsay Hoyle, who happens to be the Speaker of the House of Commons, and also has been a very good Speaker of the House of Commons, especially when compared with John Bercow, and we remember those dark days pre 2020, and put pressure on Lindsay Hoyle in order, I felt, to save his own bacon because he knew he was going to get a bit of a backbench rebellion. However, what was revealed as this went on is it wasn't just that. I still think it was that, and I still think if they took the vote today, he'd have that problem. But it wasn't just that. So, in order to explain what it was, Lindsay Hoyle has had to say what he genuinely believes and what a lot of people are saying quietly in the corridors of Parliament, and that's that there is this threat from a very small minority of people, of Islamist extremists, and they are making threats, sexual threats against MPs and their wives. They are making threats against the children and the families of MPs. Very serious stuff. And the reason people are taking it so seriously is because it's demonstrably true that it's happened previously. I mean, I don't want to reel off all of the Islamist attacks that have taken place in London alone in the last 5 to 10 years, but because we're all aware of them. And they probably don't get the sort of airtime that they should. And we talk about things like being kind on social media and dampening down the rhetoric, etc., which all seem to be these huge diversions around what the actual issue is. But what's some really extraordinary things have happened. First extraordinary thing happened was the Tories and SNP united in the moment, which is something you don't see at all very often. And we had MPs like Lee Anderson saying that he felt sympathy for the SNP. It should have been the SNP's day. Now, I don't suppose for a minute that he would have sympathised with the SNP at all on the day. However, what he said is true, and the SNP really didn't get to 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 have the debate that they wanted. And it was torpedoed by the Labour Party. You know, I tweeted about this, and a lot of people come back to me and said, how could you possibly think this is Labour? And it's really easy. It was a Labour MP, who is the Speaker, being put pressure on by the Labour Party to stop a debate which would have taken place across Parliament. Now, that was the only reason that happened on Wednesday evening. Now, of course, the underlying issue, it appears, are these threats. Now, we'll get into this, I'm sure. Obviously, there aren't 60 million Muslims in the UK. So the threat is there, and we have to be honest about it, but it comes still from a minority. I think my statistics are right when I say there are about 7 million Muslims in the UK. And it would be remiss for me to say that not all of them are, of course, extremists. But if we don't talk about the element that are, they're kind of free to continue to threaten us. And we've been very unstatesmanlike in the way that Parliament has operated this week. What I think we should have done, which is much more difficult and probably puts people at risk, is stand resolute to it and say, no, that's not what's going to happen. You know, we have to stick to convention. Our Parliament's thousands of years old, and we need to make sure we stick to that constitution, and we didn't, and it set a precedent. And Lindsay Hoyle, to be fair to him, apologised almost immediately, then apologised again. I think some people have got away with things here. I think Sir Lindsay Hoyle, not Doyle, I keep saying Doyle because of our great leader Andrew, but he's got away with it slightly. He probably would have got sacked very quickly had he not mentioned the Islamist extremist element to this, and of course the Labour Party, I'm going to call for the Speaker to stand down. Obviously, the SNP have done, and some MPs have done. I think Sunak has stopped short, unless I've missed something today. He has said, up until this point, he has some serious concerns. So I think we find ourselves in a position where I hope what Lindsay Hoyle has done is actually express his real concern, and he hasn't done it to cover the Labour's senior team's backside, which I fear could also be true. But we are left now with this aftertaste, which is we capitulated, and what level of issue do we have? And it's led into other stories that, of course, have happened since. And I know we're going to discuss that, Nick.
Yeah. So should Lindsay Hoyle go, do you think, or you're sympathetic, you say he shouldn't go?
I thought he would go. I am sympathetic to Lindsay. I genuinely think he's a good guy. He seems to approach things I must say, up until Wednesday. Right up until that point, I'd have had no problem with him being in that seat. Now, what he did was a huge error of judgment. However, if he did it for the reasons that he's saying he did it for, it's understandable. I just think he could have been a little bit more open and honest about it. We could have had the debate against that backdrop instead of, at the time, quite clearly masking that as an issue. So I think he now stays in that seat because it's, why would you disrupt now? There's a lot of other things going on. And if he has deliberately manipulated it to save himself, he's done a great job. If he's deliberately manipulated to save Keir Starmer, he's also done a good job because none of the focus at the moment is on Keir Starmer, and I think it should be.
Yeah, true. Slippery Starmer. Slippery Starmer. We were talking on the Weekly Skeptic about what name Trump might have for Starmer. Spineless Starmer. Boring Starmer. We had a few different ideas. Folks, he's so spineless. This guy is so spineless. Anyway, yes. So Starmer, slippery Starmer, getting out of it again. But yeah, I lost all sympathy for Hoyle when I saw this video Leo shared. Now, Leo actually got the date wrong initially. It was Leo Kerr's misinformation because he said it just happened, but it was actually from February 1st. But all the points still stood because it was a video of Lindsay Hoyle talking after Mike Freer had stepped down under Islamist intimidation. He'd stepped down as an MP. There'd been an arson attack and death threats. And yet this video with Lindsay Hoyle had all the usual mealy-mouthed stuff about white fundamentalists and far-right extremists. Didn't mention Islam once. Did mention Sir David Ames right at the end, who was, of course, brutally murdered by radical Islamists. So it was really disgusting stuff. And I just said, they're going to learn nothing. And this is someone this delusional or disingenuous should never be Speaker of the House. Because what's really interesting, Callum, my friend at Lotus Eaters, had a tweet that did really well, or X post, where a guy from GB News actually put this report. An MP texts, "Some of us are really scared to leave. One of my female colleagues was surrounded by nasty protesters in Westminster Hall earlier and filmed, etc. She was in tears when she came back to tea room, just saying it is intolerable." So this is MPs being very scared and intimidated. Now, Callum said MPs are scared to leave because the people they imported are outside. Good, now they know how it is. And I would be tempted to agree with Callum, except that they already knew how it was because Sir David Ames was brutally murdered. So what's incredibly strange here is, one thing is like, MPs now finally meet the reality of their policies. That's a quite usual thing that happens. We have this elite. They don't care about us. They don't care about the day-to-day reality of British people. They face it. Now suddenly they're worried. That's one narrative. But it doesn't even stack up because one of their own was brutally murdered. I mean, you could also got Joe Cox, of course, on the other side. But when you've got David Ames, and the guy who murdered David Ames was looking at Michael Gove for a long time, which would be an even bigger story because he's a more famous MP. He just wanted to murder someone. Yeah, they're both Christians. Was it a Christian element? Could it be that now the left are finally getting it, and that's the difference? Could it be that non-Christians are getting it, and that's the difference? I don't know, because I think if an MP was murdered, you wouldn't go, well, he's Christian and on the right, it won't happen to me. You would probably think, that could happen to me. And if you've got any kind of imagination. So it's actually even worse. Their own people are getting murdered, their own colleagues, and they still can't call it out. The speaker still can't call it out, and he starts to go, oh, far right, this and that. He can call out Joe Cox, but he can't call out the other side still. And so I just think we're heading towards an abyss. It's only going to get worse.